Okay, philosophy of biology class. Welcome. These slides are about the paper Evolution and Moral Realism. So this is just a image of the paper on the right there. You'll notice that it's published in the British Journal for the Philosophy of Science, which means this is a professional philosophy article written for professional philosophers of science like me. It's 2017, so it's fairly new. The authors, Kim Sterelny and Fraser here, I have this fun picture. They're both philosophers at Australian National University. Kim Sterelny has written a bunch of books on the evolution of humans, and Ben Fraser, I think, is a postdoc right now. Okay, so let's try to go through this paper and understand what's going on. The way to understand what's going on is to read the abstract. And the abstract is so important. I'm not saying don't read the paper. I'm saying read the abstract, then read the abstract again. Then when you're stuck, go back to the abstract, because that's what tells you in a professional journal article what to expect. That's what's actually going on. Now, if you do that and you read the abstract, what you'll discover is that the goal of the paper is to defend a certain version of moral realism. And we'll talk about what they mean by that and what their version is as we go along. They also want to join that together with a particular account of how evolution has led to our moral thinking, our current moral thinking. What's the evolution of moral cognition, you might say. Now, they take a particular worry about this to be the debunking argument, the worry that evolution debunks morality. So all along the way, they're going to keep bringing that back up and saying what they have to say about it. Okay, so let's just start with the paper. It's divided into 5 sections. The first section, they basically are just framing the problem. They're setting it up. They're defining realism right away. Now, they define realism at the beginning just like Elliot Sober does. It requires that some moral claims are true. So that rules out what Sober calls subjectivism, or what you might call nihilism or error theory. And importantly, they're true independently of what anyone thinks. That is, their stance independent. So it doesn't matter if people think that killing is wrong. It might be, it might not be. We might just all be wrong. In fact, that's one thing that they say almost characterizes realism, the conceptual possibility that everybody's wrong all the time. Now, they do something, they add that realists aren't skeptics. That is, not only metaphysically are there moral facts, but also that we can know them, that they're somehow able to be grasped. Sober doesn't think that's part of the definition. Neither does Justin Horn in the other paper we read, but I don't think that really changes much. Nobody would want to be a realist and a skeptic at the same time. That's a reason to give up realism. Okay, so once they've defined realism that way, they immediately bring up this worry about debunking. From the very first section, they point out that a number of authors have various versions of the debunking arguments. Sharon Street, Richard Joyce, Michael Roos. The worry is that once you understand why we make the moral judgments we do, and in particular, you understand how evolution has influenced them, that actually undermines realism. It shows that our beliefs are not actually tracking the truth. They're not responding to the moral facts. They're instead tracking some kind of adaptive behavior. So that could leave you to think that there are no moral truths, or just that your beliefs in them are unjustified. That's Justin Horn's argument. That's the paper that we just read a few days ago. As a comparison to help you understand, they mention this religious debunking argument because they assume that you'll agree with them about that. So this is supposed to be a helpful analogy. The idea is that it's very plausible that religious commitment is actually evolutionarily adaptive. A number of books have been written about this fairly recently. Pascal Boyer has a book, I think it's called Religion Explained. David Sloan Wilson has a book, Darwin's Cathedral. The idea is that religious commitment, and in particular joining religious communities, can enhance cooperation, social cohesion. It's actually beneficial for religious individuals. It makes you happy, for example. So it's very plausible that religious belief could spread and persist, even though it's not truth tracking at all. this is not the same argument that Dawkins gives about memes. Their religious belief is spreading because it's literally good for the meme itself. Here, it's good for the individuals that are religious. But their idea is that, as they say, they put it this way: we would believe in gods whether gods were real or not. If you accept that, then the thought is, well, then our beliefs aren't justified. They're not actually tracking the truth. We would have them no matter what. And the suggestion from the evolutionary debunking argument for morality is that similarly, we'd have moral beliefs whether or not there were any moral facts, or whatever the moral facts were, maybe if they were different. So maybe those aren't justified either. That is, our beliefs aren't justified. That's the debunking argument. Ultimately, Sterelny and Fraser conclude that the cases aren't really parallel. So they accept the religious debunking argument. And part of the reason they think they're not parallel, and this is an important thing to think about, they think that the effects of religious belief, that is, that it's actually good for us and will make you happy and more pro-social, actually depends on us being unaware of its evolutionary function. Their idea is just, they don't really go into depth here, but they just assume that once you realize that then religion doesn't still hold its grasp on you. That you're like, oh, then I guess I don't believe in God anymore. Or I guess I don't have any particular reason to be nice to my neighbor because I'm going to go to heaven. After all, I realize that belief is not justified. But they think that's different with morality. So there's two separate claims here. One is that the effects of religious belief do depend in this way, and that's something you could disagree with. You might think you're perfectly aware of it and still want to be religious. But they think that if you are aware of this in the morality case, it actually doesn't undermine its effects. Morality will still hold its grip on you. You'll still be committed to fairness. And in fact, you'll still benefit from having those commitments. Morality will still lead you to be more pro-social, even if you're aware of why it evolved. Okay, that's section 1 of the paper. It's just sort of framing. Now, section 2 is another bit of framing. It's locating it within the history of this debate in philosophy of science about reduction. So their idea is that they want to reduce the normative realm, in this case, particular ethical facts, just to natural facts. Things that could be, say, discovered by science, can be studied empirically. So reduction is a kind of explanatory reduction. The idea is that there's something deeper kind of really going on. So here's some possible examples, things that have been mentioned in the literature. It's not clear that they accept all of these things. They just sort of mention them as things that other people accept. So there's classical genetics. You learn about Mendel's laws and various patterns of inheritance. And that's true. Those things really are explanatory, and it really is useful to know that a trait is dominant, for example. But what's really going on at the deeper level, what explains those higher level things, is molecular genetics, DNA sequences and gene expression. Here's a suggestion by JJC Smart. Maybe pleasure and pain and other kinds of neural activities actually reduce to neural physiology. There's nothing more going on than these sort of deep, neurons firing back and forth. Maybe water is H2O. So yes, we know a lot about liquids, and Newton understood liquid very well, lots of properties of water. But what's really going on is chemistry, which he didn't know about. So there's this kind of deeper explanation. The chemistry of H2O explains why water has the properties that it does, but not the other way around. So the reduction is kind of in one direction. Beliefs and desires, you might have what's called folk psychology. They'll mention this in a moment. What's really going on is the deeper level. There's a kind of cognitive psychology going on. And actually, they think that last one is the best model. They don't think morality is going to be reduced in this kind of water is H2O way. They think there's not like, oh, this is what a belief is. Let me tell you the exact neural structure there is. No, beliefs and desires are still very useful. We're not going to get rid of them and replace them with neuroscience. Just like we don't, on the other hand, we might plausibly in the future kind of replace facts about liquid with just chemistry. Okay, so their goal is to kind of give an ethical reduction. So section 3 of their paper points out that once we know more about a field, it's not that it's either vindicated or it's not. There's actually a whole continuum of possibilities. So here's some examples of these folk theories or pre-scientific theories. There's folk psychology, like beliefs and desires, and it's actually not really clear what's going to happen in the future with psychology. But here's 2 cases that we understand very, very well. Pre-modern astronomy and theories about witches. So, for example, in the case of witches, it's best understood as an error theory. Once you realize, so we had this whole systematic theory of, the devil is affecting these people and not these people, and these people have magical powers and these people don't, and they're tracking the weather or who knows what is going on. But as we know more, we realize, turns out there are no witches. So we should have an error theory of witches. People really were trying to say this person is a witch. They were ascribing a particular property, but they were just always wrong. On the other hand, partial vindication is possible. And it's only partial. So of course, full vindication is also possible, like, classical genetics and molecular genetics or something, or water's H2O. But what about the ancient astronomers? They had a lot of knowledge. So, when they wanted to predict an eclipse, or Mars looks more red when it's also brightest in the sky, they could predict when planets were going to undergo retrograde motion, where they were going to be on any given night, when the equinoxes would happen. So, and the idea is that they're actually tracking something. So counterfactually, if the world were different, for example, if days were actually longer than 24 hours, they would have known that. Their theories would have tracked that. They knew how long a year was, and they didn't just guess and get lucky. If the year was actually longer, they would have tracked that. But it's just a partial vindication. Their general beliefs, their theories about what was going on, about what caused these, were actually wrong. But they were still tracking something. And their suggestion, the Sterelny and Fraser suggestion, is that morality is going to be kind of a mixed case like that, like pre-modern astronomy, that we are actually somehow tracking the truth, even though our theories about why are sometimes wildly wrong. And we do make errors. So morality is pretty complicated. There's beliefs from lots of different sources. We have these whole mechanisms for social learning. We teach each other social norms. We learn from our parents. We pick it up through emotional responses. So to partially vindicate morality, the realists need to do at least 2 things. First, they have to show that moral facts are not redundant. And the idea there, this is coming from Justin Horn, for example. It has to be that the moral facts are actually playing an explanatory role, such that if the facts were different, then we would have different beliefs. If what's really playing the role is just our belief in morality, like, for example, our beliefs in God is what's playing the role, what's causing us to behave a certain kind of way. It's not God himself. That's the suggestion of the debunkers. If God himself is redundant, that would undermine our belief in him. However, if morality, so to defend morality, you have to show that the moral facts are not redundant. And secondly, you have to show how moral knowledge could actually be a fuel for success. Why is it actually adaptive to get it right? Okay, so they need to show that there's some kind of difference between moral truth and moral falsity. And so how could we possibly be reliable? How could we latch on to anything? Why aren't we just sort of guessing? And they give 3 different examples that are kind of related to each other of how we can learn to be morally reliable, how we can access the truth. The first is that we can be guided by our pro-social emotions. So when we behave, we see how others respond to us, and we respond to their response. So we feel guilt and shame and pride and regret, joy at various things. So your emotional responses are meant to help guide you learn what's right and wrong. They're not perfect, of course. Second, there's trial and error in these heterogeneous environments. So different people have different moral behaviors, and you can just sort of see how they work. So, here's this person over there. They're really selfish. See if it works. See if they get what they want, but they don't have any friends. Does that kind of lifestyle lead you to a good life? What about the person who's kind of ultra altruistic? They're helping everybody else. Do they actually have a good life, or do they end up impoverished and unhappy? What's the happy medium? Is there some way in between? And so trial and error, not just of your own behavior, but just sort of watching other people's behavior, can again help you pick up. You can adapt and sort of find the right way. At a kind of slightly larger scale, there's cultural group selection. So humans kind of often congregate in small social groups that share similar norms. So in the past, 10,000 years ago, these groups might have been, say, bands of 50 people or 100 people. And you can see which tribes do well. Now, we have these huge nation states and whole countries that, have different rules, and it's sort of a little bit harder. And there's so much migration and things that it's a little harder to really compare country to country, although we can still kind of do that. But certainly in the past, it would have stood out if different collectives had different social norms and moral norms, and you can see which ones actually work. And so we can sort of pick up on that, and that's how adaptation works. We can, so moral. Now the next section is about why. So given this kind of environment, that there's this kind of interaction. Okay, so why is it good to actually be moral? What's good about that? Why is that what we're going to track instead of something else? Well, it turns out that reputation is huge. So in humans especially, this happens in the animal world too, but partner choice is a big thing. You choose who you want to interact with, who you want to live with, who you want to exchange goods with. And reputation is everything. So if you have a reputation for being honest and fair and not hurting your partner, people are going to want to interact with you, and that's actually good for you. It's beneficial to be part of these social groups. So sure, maybe you can get away with something in the short term, by stealing or cheating or lying. And sometimes that may be really best for you. But often it's the case that being moral is actually good. And second, we actually can influence the norms around us. We're part of social groups. We have friends, we have neighbors, and our behavior actually, and our belief about the norms and what the norms should be, actually influences what the norms actually are, especially in the times when the norms are small, when groups are small enough. But think about moral norms about cooperation. So we actually benefit from other people being moral. That part is clear. Everyone agrees on that. It's not so obvious how we benefit from ourselves being moral, but it's clear we benefit from other people being moral, from other people being cooperative. So, but if the groups are small enough, our own beliefs about what the norms should be actually affect what the norms are. Okay, so the final section here, their view is that moral truths are actually principles of action and interaction that support forms of cooperation. So they enhance social cohesion. Now, the reason these norms are stable is because they're fair enough, they're pretty good. They give almost everyone an incentive to continue to cooperate, right? Everyone is basically equal at some level. As I think Hobbes put it, we're not so strong that we can go around and survive on our own. Anyone can be killed by anyone else. So everyone has an incentive to continue to cooperate. Now, in favorable cases, and they say only favorable, so it's not obvious, and this is only a partial vindication. But in some cases, they think these norms, the moral norms that we endorse, that we believe are right, the reason we endorse them is actually because they're true, because we are right, because over time, we learn to get it right. If there's different mini groups that have different views about how to treat each other, the groups that are more moral, that is fair, they don't kill each other, they don't steal from each other, they're slightly pro-social, maybe they're a little bit selfish, they don't sacrifice their own lives at the drop of a hat, but the more moral groups actually do better. It's better for the individuals. And we can see that, we can learn that through group selection over time. The good behaviors spread. And so we can make progress. We can learn from our emotions. We can pick up behaviors from other people. And so when we endorse these norms, they actually promote successful social interaction. And so they'll spread through a population. And so individuals now form the moral judgments they do, in part because they're actually true, because those judgments really are tracking social cooperation and cohesion. Okay, so to kind of sum up the paper now, go back to the beginning. They think this is a view about moral realism. So it really is true that some things support social cooperation and cohesion. For example, not killing each other was very plausible. Protecting, taking care of each other's kids, being fair, not stealing. It really is true that those things are moral. And we really can know that. And evolution has led to us believing those things precisely because they are, in fact, the things that enhance social cooperation and cohesion. So they think it avoids the debunking argument. That's the big worry, that once you learn that this is why you have the moral views you do, that you would sort of give them up or that they wouldn't help anymore. But no, they think there's still reasons to be moral, even when you understand where this came from. So that's Sterelny and Fraser, Moral Evolution and Moral Realism.